Mm-hmm. Right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, good night, and good morning, and welcome, everyone. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, depending on the time zone in which you live, because there are always people in this meeting from all over the world. I am Shakira Mohammed, a teacher for the past 15 years, and this is the 149th edition of our Zoom public meeting. We wish to sincerely thank all those who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing pan-Indo-Caribbean and pan-Indian diaspora global project. So for 148 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. And in the past 3 years and 3 weeks, we have featured over 605 presenters from all parts of the world, speaking on 148 topics. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, which is a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. In order to continue this weekly program and to make it bigger and better, we are asking that you give us your suggestions as well as your donations, and you can contact Dr. Kumar Mahabir for further details. So we wanted to recognize the Muslim community who is now observing the holy month of Ramadan, Hindus who have just celebrated the birth of Lord Hanuman, and today is Easter Sunday, which is being celebrated by many Christians across the world. And we are so happy to be recognizing each of these proceedings. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator this evening or tonight is Shalama Mohammed, the co-director of this Zoom platform, who is a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. Shalama, welcome.
Thank you very much, Shakira. Namaste, assalamu alaikum to everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for choosing to spend today with us. This public meeting will take the usual form of a panel presentation, followed by questions and answers. To avoid trolls from invading our program, your mic has been muted. Speakers are advised not to admit anyone, not to unmute anyone, and please do not allow anyone to share your screens. Thank you. So this virtual event should not exceed 2 hours. And please be reminded that the meeting is also being live streamed on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. So I just want to say welcome and hello to everyone on YouTube at this time. We're very excited about the topic today, which is Vastu architecture and climate change. Vastu architecture is an ancient Indian system of building design that emphasizes the balance of energies within a space. There are many ways in which Vastu can have direct and indirect impact on climate change and global warming. In the following discussion, we will see how Vastu plays a significant role in promoting sustainable practices and raising awareness of the importance of protecting the planet for future generations. So let's get right into it, and I want to introduce our first speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Katal Healy Singh of Trinidad, a civil and environmental engineer specializing in climate policy, environmental impact assessment, renewable energy, and sustainable use of natural resources. Welcome, sir. You have 20 minutes. Go ahead, please. Mr. Healy Singh?
Here he comes.
Yeah, one sec. Good night. I'm just trying to get I'm just trying to get the right slide. I had it there now, and here. Okay, is everybody seeing the screen?
Yes, but I'm seeing EMA's 2007 NPR. Is that the slide you wanted?
No.
It's the 11th slide.
One sec. Let's try this again. One sec. I'm sorry. How about that?
Hasn't changed.
There
Okay,
we
now it's changed. Yes.
Okay, you're seeing the front end of it, Vastu architecture and climate change?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. Yes. So good night. Sorry about that delay. So with 20 minutes, I think I have about 20 slides. So I'll get right into it. Without any further ado, I have some definitions here that I'm starting with. Actually having trouble seeing it, but because of the way the screen is. But Vastu architecture is the science of architecture, which seeks to integrate architecture with nature. And it's a very ancient tradition that was developed in India. But the principles of it essentially are for the design and layout of houses or homes, but much more than that. It is the layout of infrastructure for towns and cities, for gardens, open spaces, roads, waterworks, public amenities, shops, everything, public infrastructure, from homes to the broader sense of public amenity and infrastructure. My slide is not moving down. Oh dear. Why is that?
Do you want to try your arrow keys? Are you using the mouse or are you using your arrow keys?
I'm using my arrow keys, but they were working all the time.
Okay.
Wow. Oh dear. Why would that
Robin, can
be?
you assist?
Sorry about this. Let me just see, why is this happening? Yeah, none of my keyboard is frozen.
Okay, I will send it for Robin now to see if he
Wow.
can open it at his end. Hold on, just hang on a minute.
Wow. So sorry about that. Let's try that
That's
again.
it happens.
Okay, so it seems like it's moved here now. Are you seeing that slide? More definitions? Are you guys with me?
Yes.
Right. So I defined, sorry, this is good. So I was defining Vastu architecture, and then I was going on to some more definitions. And this, with regards to climate change, it refers to shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. And these changes have been with us since the beginning of time, and it's a natural phenomena, such as variations in the solar cycle, the times of the year. More recently, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has indicated that it's human activities that are driving climate change. And that's primarily due to the emissions of carbon dioxide in the air from the burning of fossil fuels. And that in order to deal with this, or to mitigate against these apparently much more significant changes, there needs to be a transition to low emissions and an adaptation to this changing climate as a result of human activity. The fundamentals is essentially that everything is always changing, and nature itself is replete with all powerful sources like the sun, the wind, moon, water, earth, fire, gravity. And the effect of this energetic system, whether it's wind or the electromagnetic field of the earth or other cosmic energies, they influence our lives in seemingly unfathomable or unknowable ways. But we can, with Vastu architecture and the principles of ancient Vedic science, we can make the most of these energetic changes and live healthy and wealthy lives and find success and balance with the elements that surround us, the earth, the water, fire, air, space, and so on. And again, this Vastu Shastra is a science which propounds theories based on the direction that one faces, the design of buildings, astronomy, and even astrology. So this constant energetic change that we live in, many thousand years ago, a science and an aesthetic evolved to make sense of them. And here is just a very simplified picture, which I won't spend much time on, but it shows you that, for example, on the left side, the wind is those blue arrows. It shows a structure that is aerodynamic. It's built around a central sort of foundational support. It's elevated off the ground, but I will leave the architects to say more about that specifically. But Vastu Shastra it's ancient, it's sophisticated, it's spiritual, it's scientific, it's aesthetic, it's something of tremendous value. And this is a picture showing what, pointing in different directions that I mentioned, how it works in terms of its own design and its own logic. And you can see in that picture there of a compass, essentially, where I've lost my, okay, where different parts of a house would be, where the bathroom, the dining room, etc. There's a logic to the layout of all infrastructure. And the one I want to pick up on is the septic tank, which is part of most houses. And the question is that, you know, when we generate wastewater from a house, where does it go? And I'm asking that question because I want to get into the broader infrastructure, get away from the house and home and get into the larger city or municipality. And in this picture here, what I'm attempting to show is it's a generic picture which shows essentially the continuity of all water. And the science, the Vedic science of development, which allows essentially for the protection of water supply sources, the location of reservoirs, the construction of buildings with respect to groundwater, the location of different types of infrastructure. This is a very generic diagram, but what it's attempting to show is that there is a logic and a place for everything that has a scientific grounding. It has an aesthetic grounding. It's based on essentially principles of continuity and living in harmony. So just very simply, water treatment and water sources are separate or upstream from wastewater disposal. Stormwater and wastewater can be reused for different purposes, whether it's industrial purposes or domestic purposes. And this is essentially an integrated picture of infrastructure surrounding the idea of one water. In regards to urban development generally, there's some basic principles with regards to zoning, what types of activities go where, in terms of what areas should be designated to be undeveloped or remain green, as in a green belt, the places for human housing and where people would live, where public buildings and services are, recreation centers, roads and transport facilities. This infrastructure has been, a tremendous amount of thought has been given to this a long time ago. And right. So in connected to the Vastu Shastra, there is a more recent concept of sustainability, which I think most of us would be more familiar with. And it is a similar type of organizing principle. It's much more, let's say, I wouldn't say practical, but it's much more grounded in three main concepts. But the idea is that we live and use our resources and meet our needs without doing damage or compromising the needs of future generations or natural systems. And that's essentially the concept of sustainability. And this modern concept finds its roots in ancient Vedic science, which I obviously can't get into it here. But the basic idea for sustainability is, or the link between some of these ancient concepts is this principle of sustainable development. And it is finding a balance between economic, social, and environmental development priorities. So it's important for social progress, it's important to protect the environment, and it is important to have economic development. And where these things find a balance is in this principle of sustainable development. In Trinidad, I just wanted to point out is these principles of sustainability are very much, one could describe it as a room full of elephants, in that, in fact, we ourselves are not on a sustainable path in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is getting into it. I'm just pausing to point that out. And one of the key reasons why this is the case, I can point to a 2016 survey of 1,000 people who were asked if they were aware that Trinidad and Tobago had a national environmental policy. And 98% of the 1,000 people who were asked didn't know whether there was a policy. And in fact, there has been a policy for over 20 years, but it's not one that the public are engaged with. So the principles of sustainability sort of collapse because the environmental component, or the responsibility and stewardship of the environment and the policies that pin those down, are not known, or were not known to 98% of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So let's switch a little bit now, and let's try and engage and make the link now with climate change. And what climate change, what is being said is that sustainable development is not possible without climate resilience, because the idea is that there is this growing frequency of extreme events that sort of challenge the norm or the standards for a whole variety of things. And the two aspects of the response or climate resilience, the response to climate change is to either mitigate or adapt, or both. And mitigate relates to reducing the contributions to, as I described, the greenhouse gases and emissions of carbon dioxide. And adaptation relates to very much the principles of Vastu architecture applied across infrastructure. It's very much an adaptation to things. And what is required here is that it take into account the fact that things are changing. And what's changing are there are increased risks and vulnerabilities to changes in it. And they come in the form of flooding and erosion, in the form of extreme temperatures, and in the form of disruptions that may happen from stronger winds or elevated sea levels, or coastal impacts resulting from sea level change, and so on. But the point here is that extreme weather events are causing and will cause a greater challenge to all infrastructure. And the idea that these ancient principles of Vastu Shastra and the more modern incarnation or interpretation of it as sustainability need to adapt now to accommodate these things. And in transitioning to this, it's a very complicated argument, and a lot of it is quite political. But a transition is required of everything, of all of us, of the world, to cope with these problems of that climate change bring. And what's very important to understand is that for most of us, and I say that across the board, whether it is in the developed world, in Holland or anywhere, Germany, in Europe, or whether it's the Caribbean or South Africa or India, you know, we, even before the issues of climate and adaptation and mitigation, there was very serious problems with regards to our own sustainability, our ability to survive, our development and our trajectory. And you don't have to look further than the extraordinary amount of plastics that we have produced and have come to rely on, that have now found their way into the food chains in the sea and into the atmosphere. But what this just transition will require is a systemic, drastic, unprecedented change in the way we function and operate. And a lot of people who depend on things being as they are will be very dramatically affected. And there is this rhetoric of a just transition being required. Now, this just transition, again, pointing back to Trinidad, where I'm from, we are particularly challenged by this. And I'll just say, this could take hours to talk about on its own, but I'll just say very briefly, one of the reasons why that's the case is that most of our economy is very much dependent on the fossil sector, the oil and gas sector, the energy sector as we know it, the conventional energy sector. And what's interesting about that sector is that less than 10% of the gas that we produce in Trinidad is converted into electricity for domestic consumption. Most of it, more than 90% of it, is consumed in the petrochemical sector and in the LNG sector. So, and as we've seen more recently, there have been a lot of discussions about raising electricity rates in the domestic sector. And if that logic is because of climate change, realistically, it doesn't change anything because of the relatively very small quantity that households actually consume and local commercial enterprises consume. So this just transition and the raising of prices and so on, this is, if it's being done as a result of a response to climate change, which I think a lot of the justification is based on, you know, in our case, it won't really change very much on the ground in terms of mitigation, because the energy sector has a law and a logic and a rule of its own, and it's very difficult to see politically, whether in Trinidad or anywhere, certainly not in Guyana, which is starting up its 100-year march of oil production, as we have come to the end of our 100-year march. So how will we deal with some of these climate challenges? You know, how can government facilitate the processes for adapting infrastructure to climate change? And how can planning systems respond to these very new needs? And how do we improve the way investment decisions are made so that we invest in sustainability and climate resilience, as opposed to what traditional investments may have been, for example, in the energy sector, or in uses of fossil energies that are not efficient. And, you know, how will we start this process in the Caribbean and in the developing world? And this is a huge political topic, obviously, because we are in most cases, and certainly not in the islands, in any way responsible for what has happened, but we are certainly very much affected by it.
Mr. Healy Singh, can we do this in 2 minutes?
Yep, I'm
Thank you.
almost there.
Thank you.
I spoke a little bit about planning, design, and principles, and these are some of them that you can see here. And what I want to say essentially that sustainable development, Vastu Shastra, these principles of living in harmony are challenged by these extreme or what are seen as future extreme events, and they will need to be embedded within these systems that we use for sustainability and for finding balance and harmony, because this harmony is being overturned by the actions and the impacts of humans. And what's particularly important is that future developments must propose solutions for these problems, which is for problems that are either created by or aggravated by climate change, which is pretty much everything. And so to end on the note that that Vastu Shastra, these concepts, they need to be built into climate resilience itself, for which there are many principles that are evolving. And here in Trinidad, to end, you can see 3 pictures of an inundated urban area in Port of Spain, in extraordinary developments that have taken place in constructing roads through natural vegetation and through protests which have been ongoing. And this one is a picture for some time ago. So in summary, that's what I can say, that we have ancient principles of sustainability. They apply to homes, but they also apply to the broader infrastructure and development. They have been rolled up into the idea of sustainability, and these things need to be integrated into what is being now called climate resilience. Thank you very much.
A very insightful presentation, so I want to thank you so much for that. And ladies and gentlemen, ordinarily, we really do have the Q&A session at the end of all of the presentations, but Mr. Healy Singh may not be here for that session. And so I want to just take this opportunity to pose a question that Luke would have asked in the chat. And that is, what are the metrics used to measure climate change in small island states like Trinidad? Can you answer that, Mr. Healy Singh?
Well, the metric is generally the same across the board. In Trinidad, one of the key ones they use is sea level rise, but it could be ambient temperatures, it could be the frequency and intensity and duration of climate events like rainfall or storms or hurricanes, for example. They're the metrics that are being used to measure climate change in the Caribbean generally. But this is a sensitive issue. It's according to the UN, the science has been settled. But if you are deep into this, as I am, there are always contending issues and arguments about this, and that it is, there's a strong politics behind it. But our own measuring these things as to those being used elsewhere that I've mentioned.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much for responding there, and thank you for your time and your efforts. We really appreciate your being here.
Okay, thank you. So I will step away for a few minutes and I'll try to come back so I can hear the other presenters, which I'm very keen to, and I'll be back in a few minutes. I just need to take care of something. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much. So we are also keen to hear from our next presenter, and this is Mr. Javier Ortiz Cabrejos of Peru. He's an architect and urban planner, and he's been on our program before. The first time we spoke about Vastu. He's the director of the Department of Vedic Architecture at Maharishi University of Latin America and the Caribbean. He's also the author of the book entitled Cosmic Architecture. Welcome again, sir. You have 20 minutes.
Thank you very much. I am very happy to be again with the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center and in this communication that is going all over the world. And I am very happy to speak now about Vastu and how it can be related with the climate changes. And for that, we are going to see Vastu from a perspective, a global perspective between the Vastu knowledge, properly said, and Vedic science. So we are going to share our screen. We are doing our presentation at the name of Universidad Maharishi de Latinoamérica y el Caribe. That is the organization that I am representing. I would like to start with this phrase from Louis Kahn, the architect from Finland, that says, "Everything is consciousness. In this resides the secret of how we are made. Know it. You can reach the ability to build a universe from knowing a simple leaf of grass." And Max Planck said, "I consider consciousness as fundamental. Matter is a derivation of consciousness." Maharshi Mahesh Yogi said, "Consciousness is primary." What is consciousness? In the words of Maharshi, consciousness is that one element in nature on the ground of which the infinite variety of creation is continuously emerging, growing, and dissolving. So Maharishi Vedic science is the science of consciousness. Consciousness, we had seen, is everything that is in nature. And Vedic science is having 40 different aspects. One of these aspects is what we call Sthapatya Ved, or Vastu knowledge. And as you see here, is very close related with yoga. When we speak about yoga, of course, we are speaking about unity, about the coherence. Yoga means coherence. Yoga means symmetry. Yoga means to put together. So between all these 40 aspects of Vedic science, we see that these different aspects of Vedic science comes from Atma, from the self, and goes and ends to Brahma, to the totality. So between Atma and Brahma is the whole expansion of Vedic science that starts coming from Rig Veda, and then we have the different Samhitas, as Samaved, Yajurved, and Atharvaved. And the area of Sthapatya Ved is coming from this area of Chandas or Atharvaved, as well as yoga. So we have these 40 aspects, and Sthapatya Ved is one of the Upaveds, no? The subordinated Veds or areas of knowledge of Vedic science. The Vastu Sutra Upanishad says the real knowledge of the form gives the knowledge of Brahman, the totality. So Vastu knowledge, the knowledge of Sthapatya Ved, is bringing the realization of Brahman, the totality, the realization of Atman. It continues, the Vastu Sutra Upanishad, saying, to create a form, to make a design, it's to manifest the totality, Brahman. So, to create a Vastu home, to create a Vastu city, is to create a form that manifests totality, or Brahman. Then a Vastu architecture is architecture of consciousness, because Sthapatya Ved is one of the areas of this science of consciousness that is Vedic science. Maharshi Vastu, or Vastu architecture, is a Vedic architecture. Sthapatya Ved is the Vedic architecture in harmony with natural law. The Sanskrit word sthapan means to establish, and Ved means knowledge of natural law. Then Sthapatya Ved is the Vedic science of architecture, is the area of the Vedic science, the 40 aspects of Vedic science that is related with architecture. And Vastu is the Vedic technology of construction. Maharshi Sthapatya Ved is the most ancient and complete system of architecture and planning according with the solar, lunar, and planetary influences on Earth with reference to North, South poles, and the equator, connecting individual life with cosmic life, individual intelligence with cosmic intelligence. But one of the conclusions from Vedic science is that everything is consciousness. Maharshi said, everything that is physical in the universe is consciousness. And when we see the last findings in the physics, science of physics, we see that all the immense variety of natural laws that are expressing in the universe comes from a single unified field, the superunification of all the laws of nature. From this single area, that is pure consciousness, we see that all nature is expressed. All the physical universe is expressed from the unified field, the field of pure consciousness, where we, through meditation, as transcendental meditation, we can start to experience these different subtle levels of the mind till finally transcend the finest level of the thought and arrive to this unified field of all the laws of nature, pure consciousness that gives birth to all the physical universe. The architecture also takes birth from this unified field from all the laws of From this field of all the laws of nature, we see the three main areas of architecture as function, structure, and sorry, it coming out from my mind now. No, these three areas of the architecture are coming from the unified field, and then creates the whole differences in the expressions of architecture and urban planning. So all aspects of Vastu emerge from the unified field. That means that all aspects of Vastu comes from the field of pure consciousness. The main principles of Vedic architecture is the proper orientation, the proper placement of the activities and rooms according to solar, cosmic influences, right proportions, and the Brahmastan, the center of the building. Health, happiness, and fortune are all influenced by orientation of the buildings. The main principle of Vedic architecture then is orientation in reference to the sun. As Vastu architecture is proposing, the buildings should be facing mainly to the east or to the north, mainly to the east, to the sun, which is taking birth from the morning light. So the strongest influence of natural law comes from the sun, and orientation is also related with the function of our neurons. The emission of neurotransmitters and the vibration of the certain neurons in the thalamus, hippocampus change in proportion to the angular velocity and direction in which the head moves. There are specific neurons for orientation. So our brain cells are firing according with the orientation. When we are facing east, the pattern of neurons of the thalamus in the brain are working, are moving in a most precise way. We can say that even we are producing more serotonin, that is the hormone that helps the people to feel more happy. You know, There are billions of magnetics in the brain that make it sensitive to orientation. And for that, our brain is like a compass. Knowing that auspicious and inauspicious influences due to orientation of buildings are coming depending of which direction the buildings are facing, north, south, east, or west. When the building is facing east entrance, it brings the influence of enlightenment, affluence, and fulfillment, and towards north, influence of prosperity and happiness. The author's orientations are considered to be inauspicious. Wrongly placed entrance may contribute to inauspicious negative influence, anger, aggression, constant fear, poverty, lack of vitality and success, and chronic disease. The other principle is about the proper placement of the areas at the home, no? And we have the entry that should be at the east, the worship area at the northeast, the study at the north, the guest room at the northwest, living towards west, master bedroom towards southwest, dining towards south, and kitchen towards southeast. Also, the another principle are the right proportions. Vastu design principles are the outer proportions of the Vastu buildings in terms of length, height, and width in its auspicious dimension and symmetry are designed and calculated according to cosmic formulas stated in the ancient Vedic text. So it's very important to have symmetry and order. Established in a proper Vastu means to be established in a place that promotes health and happiness in the person. Continuous violation of natural law day after day create through incorrect orientation, placement, inevitably results in widespread damage for the health of the people. So the hazards of modern architecture could be aggravated by inauspicious quality of the site, inauspicious slope and shape, inauspicious water bodies, as well as other environmental aspects. Auspicious Vastu promotes positive evolutionary influence. Building without auspicious Vastu produce negative effects. The Astanga Sangraha Sutra Thanam says one should not live one day in a building that is not according to Vastu. Now, a different scientific research has shown the impact of Vastu buildings in our lives. For example, in this study, we see that 88% of parents report their children are happier in Vastu homes. No? They are healthier in almost 70% and better doing in school around 45%. Greater success, 92% is expressing more success living in a Vastu home. 75% says that their relationships are better. Almost 70% says that their profession is going better. And almost 70% that their wealth has increased. In quality of life, family relationships improved in almost 80%. Fulfillment of goals in life exceeded 80%. Comfort of home, 95%. And overall quality of life improved around 90%. 80% also reported in the mental health improvement. Physical health improvement almost 70%. Better sleep, 60%. Less stress, more than 80%. And one one thing that is always mentioned to us is that if it's difference between Vastu in the Northern Hemisphere or in the Southern Hemisphere. We have made a study that was published 1.5 years ago about the sunlight orientation in Maharshi Vedic architecture and comparison of the results in the Northern Hemisphere and in the Southern Hemisphere. And we found that in more than 160 cases, the results were the same. So the same principles of Maharshi Vastu architecture could be applied to any of the hemispheres. Design principles based on orientation and symmetry are the main point of Vastu architecture. And everyone should try to live in a building with an ideal Vastu. Modern architecture don't have this knowledge of orientation. An example of an ideal city planning is to have the design of the city facing east or north mainly. The principle of invincibility in nature is illustrated by the Meissner effect of quantum physics, which shows that the ability to resist disorder is based on coherent collective functioning of the system. So in the Meissner effect, we find, for example, an ordinary conductor that is at the normal temperature, and when we put close by a magnet, no, then it gets attracted to him, no, thanks to the disorder of the particles inside of the ordinary conductor. In a superconductor that is in a very low temperature, the inner particles of this metal are working in a more coherent way, and then it creates a shield against this magnetic field and don't get attracted by the magnet. So this is considered an example of invincibility in nature, where we are not influenced but by the external influences. This same principle we can apply to Vastu. In ordinary cities, there is no order, there is no coherence. In an ideal city, according with Vastu architecture, we find that everything is in a perfect order and facing perfectly east or north. So this creates a Maharshi Vastu effect. In ordinary cities, the roads are running in all directions, but in Vastu ideal city, all roads are lined up parallel to north, south, east, west around the central square. So the proposal is to rebuild the world, no, with these principles of Vastu architecture. This effect of proper Vastu, which brings the support of cosmic structure to individual structures of proper Vastu buildings, is further strengthened through the Maharshi effect currents of integrating the collective consciousness emerging from the practice of transcendental meditation in groups. Thanks to that, we find that when many people is practicing transcendental meditation in a group, violent crime decrease, as for example in this study that was published in Washington, D.C. During 2 months, the number of people practicing meditation together was increasing till around 4,000 from 600, and that decreases the violent crime in almost 25%. Going more into the climate change in this aspect of coherence groups, we have this example.
Javier, excuse me, can you wrap up in a minute, please?
Yes, okay, thank you. we have these groups in Senegal in year 87 that brought changes in climate. When they were meditating together, was a decrease of rainfall in the regions of excessive rain, increased rainfall in Senegal in the areas of where was a drought, and more balance in nature, as we see here. You know, in Peru we had the same effect that we proved in year 98. We had a group coherence in the area of Puno, and the reports from several journals were saying that the drought was stopped and the rains came when these groups were meditating together. So since then, we are having many important groups meditating all over our country. We have like 50,000 students meditating in 15 different schools, no? And that have impact in the country in a decrease of the poverty index, in the decrease of social disorders, and having Peru with the lowest inflation in Latin America, and having Peru economy in the top of the world economic growth. The Vastu shield effect is one part of this effect that we are explaining now, no? And here we see, for example, how a fire, no, was touching all the areas, but not the area which was with Vastu buildings. We see here the fire didn't touch the Vastu buildings in these two photographies with these big fires. And when was a hurricane, no, in the next homes close to this Vastu building was a big impact, but not in the Vastu building. In Lima, we had as the same effect this year, no? This is a Vastu community, very big, 1,000 hectares big. And maybe you see here, this is a dry river. This year were a lot of rains in the country, and were floods and avalanches. And avalanches came through this dry river that was not having water since 100 years. But the water didn't touch our Vastu community. As you see here, this dry river, no, it came with clay, with water, with stones, and it covered everything around, but not touched our Vastu community. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.
And that was an excellent overview of Vastu Shastra and some of its effects. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to move on to our third speaker, and this is Mr. Jonathan Lipman of the United States. He's a Vastu architect in the US, India, China, and Europe. He's a director of the Maharishi Vastu Services for the USA and the English-speaking Caribbean, overseeing over $0.5 billion in projects. His presentation was pre-recorded, and we should share that with you now. Dr. Mahavir?
Hi, I have a prior commitment at another conference right now, and so I pre-recorded this talk, but I'm hopeful that I will be able to slip out of that conference so that I can join you for at least part of the question and answer period. How can we understand sustainability as an aspect of Vastu? Well, let's start with the definitions of the two terms. Sustainability is widely described as being acting so that we produce the best outcomes for both humanity and the natural environment, both now and in the future, or maintaining balance between humanity and nature. Whereas a definition of Vastu is the balancing and harmonizing laws of nature that maintain nature's stability. The primary concerns in the sustainability movement are maintaining adequate clean and fresh water, sufficient energy from non-diminishing sources provided without pollution. So that means avoiding climate change, increased CO2 levels, maintaining air quality, healthy soil, that sewage also be processed without polluting, and that we maintain biodiversity. And therefore, sustainable buildings emphasize that they are energy efficient or even self-sufficient in both energy production and use, and that they are self-sufficient in water collection and use, and that they clean their waste fully, and nature. Now, an important consideration is that nature operates according to laws that science only gradually discovers. And what this means is that we have encountered something called the law of unintended consequences. When we have thought that we have solved a problem and discovered that it created another problem. Here are some examples. In the 1970s, asbestos was banned because in construction of buildings because it was discovered that asbestos fibers can cause lung cancer. In the 1980s, it began to be understood that urethane and polystyrene foams in the event of a fire will kill the inhabitants of a building. And so wise architects avoid the use of urethane and polystyrene. In the 1990s, we became aware that in making buildings sealed tightly so as to make them more energy efficient, that we were creating sick building syndrome and poisoning people inside of buildings. In the 2000s, we finally regulated formaldehyde levels because it was understood that they were making people sick inside of buildings. In the next decade, the 2010s, we began to really understand that PFAS, a certain class of chemical which are widely found in plastics, are endocrine disruptors and very damaging to health, particularly for children. And so they began to be regulated just within the last year. And then in the 2020s, we began to really fully understand that low E windows, windows that keep out near infrared radiation and therefore allow buildings not to overheat in the summer, that near infrared radiation is extremely important for our health. And so low E windows have an unintended harmful consequence. Really, these are just examples from the last 6 decades, and the laws of nature extend far beyond human comprehension. And so we have to ask, must we continue to bumble along, causing unintended suffering with each new advance of technology? What is the solution? And the answer is no, we don't have to, because as we understand, and as Javier has already introduced to you, Ved is total knowledge. Vastu is Stapatya Ved, one of the aspects of the Vedic literature. It is the total knowledge of establishing of architecture, and it provides us with the basis for architecture in harmony with natural law. Now, how do we build buildings in harmony with natural law? Well, the most powerful influences of natural law on the surface of planet Earth are to do with the Earth's geography, the Earth's geometry, that it is a sphere and that it rotates on its axis.
Dr. Mahabir, we seem to have a glitch there in transmission.
Okay, Joan.
Those
Okay,
are
go
the
ahead.
primary architectural qualities of planet Earth. And because of this, the sun rises in the east. And the sun is the most powerful influence of natural law on planet Earth. And it comes at us from the east. And so, as Shastra says, to align ourselves with natural law is to bring the support of natural law. And how do we align ourselves with natural law? Well, to do so literally would be to orient to the east, the direction from which the most powerful influence of natural law, the sun. And so all of us in this connection know that Shastra recommends that buildings be facing east or secondarily to the north, to the east to greet the rising sun. And again, all of you understand the effects of houses that face different directions according to Shastra, and that east creates an influence of enlightenment, affluence, and fulfillment, and north creates an influence of prosperity and happiness. And so in Vastu, we always build buildings with those orientations. But is that true? Is it just a matter of belief from Shastra, or can science validate it? Well, there have been 2 studies done to date that have looked at associations between objectively measured markers of quality of life and compared them to people living in south-facing houses, the worst, all negative influences, problems, and suffering, with east and north. And what did they find out? In these studies, which were published in good peer-reviewed medical journals, the first study found that people who live in south-facing houses are 75% more likely to be burglarized than houses facing other directions. And the second study, published together with it in the Journal of Social Behavior and Personality, found that people whose homes face south had significantly poorer mental health and also reported more financial problems than people who live in east and north facing houses. And I am in the midst of doing a new study right now to ascertain whether the 3 most prominent causes of mortality, that is stroke, heart conditions, and cancer, are more prevalent in houses that face the directions that Vastu says are worse for our health. And I have recruited a physician who is a specialist in stroke and another one in cardiology, and I'm now attempting to recruit an oncologist to participate with me in this study. And I have the research staff lined up. And if anyone who's listening is an oncologist or close to one who would like to participate in the study, then please reach out to me, info@maharishi.vastu.org, so that you can join with me in that study. But what we know to date in what has been measured, that yes, it is true that building orientation does associate significantly with quality of life. But also our own orientation. We spend 1/3 of our day oriented in one direction when we are sleeping, and Shastra tells us that we should sleep with our head, that is the pillow, to the east or to the south. Avoid west, and absolutely avoid sleeping with pillow or head to the north. And is this measurable? Is this real or just a superstition? Well, I did an extensive literature review through PubMed, went through many studies, and I found 4 published studies, and there are 2 more which I've since found, but 4 in this chart, which have all shown that yes, in fact, there are real differences in quality of life, in physical and mental health, better in people who sleep with head to the east or south, and worse among people who sleep with head to the north or to the west, including such things as score on a mental health exam, a degree of irritation and confusion, and heart rate, blood pressure rate, serum cortisol rate, and serum cholesterol levels. So these are very real, important recommendations. And in another study that I had the good fortune of helping to participate in, we also Shastra is that we understand that there's a great value to morning, sunrise, east, light. And in my literature review, I found these 5 studies, and I have since found 2 more, all of which show that there are a variety of different markers of health which are improved when people, human subjects, are exposed to east or morning light and are diminished when people are exposed instead to west or afternoon light. And so another principle of Vastu is face buildings east with lots of windows on the east side so that we can benefit from east light. In fact, building in harmony with natural law from the deepest level is necessary to fulfill sustainability. You see, the examples that I gave, the effects of orientation, the effects of east light, these are all measurable, and that is because Vastu operates from the level of natural law, from the deepest level of reality. And from that level, all actions that are taken are harmonious with all of nature. And this, therefore, is the solution to building sustainably, is to build using the principles of Vastu. Now, I practice Maharshi Vastu, Maharshi Mahesh Yogi, a name familiar to all of you, who introduced transcendental meditation to the world and many of the other Vedic technologies, and who spent 20 years researching and restoring the ancient Vedic system of Shastra to its full authenticity and therefore its full effectiveness. And so the system of Vastu that I practice, as do the other speakers, Javier and Michael, is Maharshi Vastu, this system that he restored. And in doing so, Maharshi had to recognize that today, in the 21st century, there are unique hazards from construction, which therefore should also be addressed in ideal health building. And so Maharshi added to Maharshi Vastu some elements of the 20th and 21st century that address ways in which construction today is out of balance with nature. Part of this has to do with taking full advantage of the value of east light. And we therefore want to build, taking advantage for heating and cooling buildings, taking advantage of the sun. And so one example is that we use passive solar energy, ideally, to generate heat and to naturally keep buildings cooler. We use active solar to generate electricity. We use solar thermal as appropriate to heat water. And we use daylighting to reduce electric use. And when we do these things, we find that building Vastu off the grid is very important. Now, making full use of the sun by generating electricity was so important to Maharshi that even as early as the 1980s, when photovoltaic electric panels were extremely expensive, unlike today, Maharshi had a factory built in India to manufacture photovoltaic panels so that he would have them available for his buildings in India and Europe. Today, of course, they're economical, and it's very easy to build Vastu or non-Vastu powered solely by photovoltaic panels. And here is the first Vastu community in the world. It's a Maharshi Vastu community in Fairfield, Iowa, that is completely off the grid, and it is powered by photovoltaic electric panels and wind turbines, but primarily directly from the sun. And here are a few of the houses. We don't see photovoltaic electric panels on them because most of the panels in this community are collected in one location. It's a community solar project. And here are a few more of the houses in Abundance Eco Village, completely off the grid. And here is my own house, which is located about 2 miles away from AEV and is where I'm speaking from. And we see the photovoltaic panels in front of my own home, and my own home also is completely off the grid, like Abundance Eco Village, both for electricity and for water and for sewage processing. There is also the element of passive solar, where we shade sunlight from entering a house during the time of the year when we're concerned with cooling a house, air conditioning, but we let it in. Not so important in Trinidad, but in the northern climates in the wintertime when we want the heat. And this is an example of a Maharshi Vastu house in Switzerland, designed by my wonderful associate Christian Schweitzer, which makes fabulous use of passive solar. However, passive solar alone is really effective on the south side of buildings in the Northern Hemisphere. And how do we shade a building from that severe solar gain that we get late in the morning on the east and early in the afternoon on the west side of buildings? Well, it turns out that one of the patterns of Vastu that Maharshi strongly endorsed is to build verandas on the east and west side of buildings. We see an example in this rendering. And when you have verandas on the east and the west, this allows that nourishing sunlight around the time of sunrise from penetrating deep into a building, but late morning sunlight is shaded, and therefore solar gain is completely controlled. Here is a Maharshi Vastu house that we built using this pattern of east and west verandas. And here is an entire hotel that we built using this pattern in Maharshi Vastu. And here's a detail of the east-facing building showing how the windows are deeply in shade once early morning passes. Another example of almost all of the elements of solar design in Maharshi Vastu is the Sustainable Living Center at Maharshi International University, which I had the great honor of being the design architect for. And it was built according to the standards of LEED Platinum. LEED Platinum is the highest measure of sustainability in the major system for recording how sustainable buildings are in the Western world. And this scored enough points to be ranked as LEED Platinum. I could spend the whole 20 minutes just talking about all of the sustainable features in this Maharshi Vastu building, but I just want to point one out. Note that it has a flat roof with lots of solar panels on it, except that at the center, there is a higher roof right here, and underneath it is a corridor that runs through the building. This is the east side, this is the south side, and along this high wall over the central corridor, there are lots of south-facing windows. That means that sunlight is brought into the very center of the building, from which it is bounced through clear stories into rooms inside of the building, such that every single room in this building is daylit, and the classrooms are each lit from two directions. And so it is quite possible to build Vastu buildings, to build east-facing buildings, and to take advantage of all of the elements of ideal solar design. Here's another example. This is an east-facing Maharshi Vastu office building that I consulted on. It's a, I think, 9 or 10-story office building in suburban Washington, D.C., and it was built so sustainably that it is a LEED Platinum building, that very highest marker of sustainability. And one example of the scores of sustainable features in it, we see that sunlight shines in from multiple sides to the bullpen where the secretaries are, whereas typically in office buildings, secretaries don't get any sunlight at all. In another example, the Argiro Student Center, the Student Center at Maharshi International University, which I designed, and which we designed to the standard of LEED Gold, I tried very hard to see how much of the building could be daylit so that it would not need to have any electricity spent lighting rooms. And I was able to be successful. Here, for instance, is the main dining hall in the Argiro Student Center, and you can see that by having very high, large windows or clear stories, I was able to bring so much sunlight into this large room that the chandeliers are really just ornamental. They were not needed at all during the day. Here's a couple of renderings of a house that I designed and built in Austin, Texas. I haven't been back since it was completed, so I don't have photographs of it. And it was also designed to the standard of LEED Platinum, and of course it's Maharshi Vastu. And as in Trinidad, there is very severe solar gain on the east and west side of buildings in Austin, Texas. The south side is easy to shade, but on the east and west, in the case of this building, what I did is I made kind of wings of solar panels that project off to the east and to the west of the building, and they create shade on the east and west windows after sunrise. And in that way, we were able to get pure sunlight on all sides to penetrate the house without heat buildup in the summertime. And I was able to do quite similar things in my own house. One other element of ideal sustainable design that, again, we could spend an entire hour on, but I'll just mention in a couple of words, we see in the interior of my own house, which is that we emphasize building of natural and non-toxic materials so that we avoid the unintended consequence of synthetic materials. So in a quick summary, we think that sustainable design is in conflict with Vastu because it prefers a southern orientation in a northern climate, and Vastu prefers an eastern orientation. And yet, what I have demonstrated is that we can build to the standard of LEED Platinum, and as Michael will show you in a minute, to the standard of Passive House with east-oriented buildings, so there's no conflict there. We design symmetrical buildings, bilaterally symmetrical, rather than orienting towards the midday sun or towards the predominant wind direction. We avoid foam insulation so that the buildings are Sattvic and they do not lose the connection to the natural universe. We prefer cross ventilation to building super tight buildings that have no fresh air, no inadequate infiltration of air. Yes, you can put in heat recovery ventilators and those can be necessary, but there's nothing like real cross ventilation, at least a little bit every day. We avoid ferrous metals, iron, because we understand in Shastra that iron is associated with Shani, which retards our evolution. And still we can build buildings with water collection on the roofs. That would be another lecture, but there's no conflict there. We avoid certain kinds of solar window film because they, such as when we want really strong solar heat gain coefficients, that they reduce the admittance of near infrared light, which is something we want to avoid for our good health. So at least on the east side, we don't use high solar heat gain coefficient windows. We use verandas on the east and west to avoid east and west heat gain. And while artificial lighting has its place, it's necessary at night, we prefer the effect of true sunlight. And recycling we can talk about in another lecture. I'm out of time, so I just want to conclude by saying that sustainability is balance in nature, and balance in nature is a principle of Vastu. The understood aspects of sustainability are really only its surface values, and the deeper values can be harmonized with the surface values, and this gives us true sustainability through true Vastu. For more information or to see the scientific research that I've talked about, just email us at info@maharishivastu.org.
So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen, a very enlightening presentation from Mr. Jonathan Lippman, both literally and metaphorically. Thank you, sir. I just want to point out that Mr. Lippman is indeed with us at this time. And for those of you all who may have questions for him, please do post it in the chat so that he may attempt to answer them in the chat. And that is just to ensure that we have enough time to cover everything in the Q&A, because as it is right now, we're already at 4:28 and we still have our fourth and final speaker that we're anxious to hear. So let me introduce him now, and that is Mr. Michael Chelnov of the United States. He's a specialist in designing Vastu buildings that are compliant with the International Passive House Standard, which uses maximum natural energy and low carbon footprint, which mitigates climate change. Welcome, Mr. Chelnov, and thank you for your patience. Feel free to unmute your mic.
Yes, and also I have to share my screen, or it's already shared perhaps.
No, please share your screen.
Okay.
Okay, we are seeing it clearly.
Okay, good. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So I'm starting with this picture, which will also be very relevant at the end. This is a Transcendental Meditation Academy located in the Blue Ridge Mountains, 2 hours west of Washington, D.C., USA. It has 3 innovative features. The first feature is that it was designed according to the ancient system of building in harmony with nature for health and happiness, Maharshi Vastu architecture. Orientation, placement, and proportion are involved, as well as the use of natural, non-toxic materials. One example of orientation, which you probably can see on the screen, is all the buildings catch the first rays of the sunrise. Now, this particular academy, or it's almost like a small village, incorporates principles of the International Passive House Standard, the most rigorous, energy-efficient building standard in the world. Okay, now, this is a picture of our home. It's the Earth seen at sunrise from the International Space Station. This shows how short our atmosphere is. If the Earth was an apple, the atmosphere would be about the thickness of the skin of the apple. This is where life on Earth has evolved. All of nature, all the animals, and humanity thrive in this delicate place. We think that the sky is huge, but actually the area where life exists is only about 10 miles high. Gravity holds this atmosphere close to the Earth, and certain gases create a greenhouse, as seen here. So the yellow rays are the radiation of the sun coming down and hitting the Earth, at which point it turns into heat, and that creates the livable place that we know. This is just a quick overview of the greenhouse effect. Gases have collected in the atmosphere, which we call greenhouse gases. That is carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. On the left is the way it's been for 500,000 years. Sunlight shines through the atmosphere and becomes heat when it hits the Earth. Some of that heat remains in the atmosphere, creating a climate which we have gotten used to in the past. On the right, we see that gases have accumulated and they're creating a thicker blanket. As a result, more heat stays in the atmosphere and less heat escapes into space. This diagram shows how our energy use has grown from 1950 to 2021. As you can see, it has grown by 600%. This has caused an unprecedented amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Here we can see how the temperature has changed from 1960 to 2023. The green light shows how the temperature increase could slow down so that we would end up with only 1.5 degrees centigrade warming. You can see that green line. The yellow line shows a less optimistic scenario. And the red line shows what will happen if we don't stop dumping 100 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every day. The Drawdown Project is the world's leading resource for climate solutions. Drawdown is the point in the future when levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and start to steadily decline, thereby halting climate change. This shows the different sources of gases that we are putting into the atmosphere. On the right side, the orange bar is due to electricity production, the green bar to food and agriculture, the blue bar is industry, transportation, buildings, and other energy-related emissions are the rest. Now, on the right side, you can see what the ocean can absorb and what the land can absorb. And so a huge amount of that heat and those gases, that CO2 cannot be absorbed. And so it remains in the atmosphere. And that causes the overheating. Now, just looking at CO2, this pie chart shows how much of the CO2 emissions come from buildings in orange, how much from industry in light gray, and how much comes from transportation in dark gray. So it's quite clear that the operation of buildings plays a major role in climate change. One of the main efforts related to buildings is to stop using any carbon-generating fuels to operate buildings. And this also means stop using electricity that's generated by coal, propane, or oil. But there's more to the story. We also have to take into account the embodied carbon that is produced in the manufacturing of materials and the process of construction. This diagram shows over a period of 30 years how much energy is used to operate a high-performance building. That's the dark blue. Now notice the tall yellow bar on the left. That is the energy that is expended to make the materials and build the building. This is called the embodied carbon, and it also needs to be taken into account when designing a building. We can ask ourselves, how are we going to make civilization change its habits to reduce carbon due to building? One approach is shown in the next slide. The zero code is to be added by local authorities to all the building codes. Of course, this will have to be a gradual process as new construction processes and materials become available. So it's quite clear, to stop contributing to global warming, buildings simply need to, 1, reduce energy use, 2, stop operating with carbon-creating fuels, and 3, reduce the use of processes and materials that increase carbon in the atmosphere, embodied carbon. The Atheno Eco-Calculator is one of many software tools that make it possible to evaluate the embodied carbon in materials due to manufacturing and transportation. This is a tool that's available. Okay, regarding the energy efficiency of a building, the Passive House Standard is a popular tool that has been adopted in Europe and North America. It allows one to build a building that uses as little energy as possible for its operation. So that's on the left. And then you make sure to have low embodied carbon in that building. Moving towards the right, you make sure it's all electrified and it's all clean electricity. And that makes building a building climate action. You're actually taking a step to reduce climate change. There are 5 passive house principles. The first is super insulation. On top, you can see that above the little house. To the second to the left is airtight construction. But as John pointed out, an airtight building is not safe. And so heat recovery ventilation, you need to be able to ventilate the building, change the air once an hour. And there's technology now that allows you to do that. And when you're exhausting air, you're extracting the heat from that and putting it into the incoming air. It's called an energy recovery ventilator. Then the building should be thermal bridge free, and it should have high performance windows. These are the 5 principles. Now let's look at an example of Vastu architecture that is built with a very small carbon footprint. A Transcendental Meditation Academy in the Blue Ridge Mountains 2 hours from Washington, D.C., USA. First of all, it was designed according to the ancient system of building in harmony with nature for health and happiness, Maharshi Vastu architecture. And we've heard a lot about this from Javier and John. Orientation, placement, and proportion are involved, as well as the use of natural, non-toxic materials. And you can see that orientation is important here because all the buildings are catching the first rays of the rising sun. It also incorporates principles of the International Passive House Standard, which we'll now see. Here is one of those buildings that you saw along the ridge in the previous photograph. You see all those buildings there. And this is one of them. Here's a picture of the porch on the front of the building, which gives access to all the individual rooms. This also serves to shade the windows from the sun in the morning, except the very early rising sun, which is very precious. So now we're going to see 5 examples of, here's super insulated construction, the next one. These walls are 14 inches thick and they're filled with cellulose insulation, which has a very low embodied energy footprint. Here's another view of the highly insulated wall. These were built in a factory. Now we've gone to high performance glazing. We're going to see an example of that. Here's a typical room, and you can see that the wall is quite deep, and those windows are very, very effective windows. Now we're talking about that important aspect of bringing fresh air into the building, even though it's airtight. And so every building has a couple of these machines that extract the stale air and bring in fresh air, but they extract the heat from the stale air and bring the fresh air in. So when you walk into a Stapatyevaite building, even though it's in winter, the air is fresh, like in spring. This shows how the air is being distributed throughout the building. Here we can see, if you look towards the front, just to the left of that fan, you see there's a little opening. That's where the fresh air is coming in. And then in front of that bookcase there, you see the source of heat for this building, even when it gets to -10 centigrade in winter. There's a little radiator there, electric radiator, and only half of it is used, even when it's very cold outside. So the building is very well insulated. Now we're going to talk about airtight construction. The next drawing. When an architect designs a building like this, he has to put the air barrier line all through the drawing. You see this red line. And that way he knows that there's an air barrier to make it airtight. But then when the building is built, a blower door is used to make sure that there's no leak of air. Here's an overall section of the building which shows the thick insulated walls. Now we're going to take a look at some of the other buildings, also designed according to the Passive House Standard, as well as Vastu architecture. This is a meditation hall. You see the interior. Here's another view showing the skylights in the center. Here's a dining hall built according to Vastu and Passive House. Here's a building used for courses. This is one of the bungalows also used for courses. Even though it's smaller than all the others, it's built to Vastu and according to Passive House. Now, one thing I'd like to make a point here is that carbon neutral buildings suitable to mitigate climate change need to be designed differently depending on the climate where they are situated. In many parts of the world, cooling is more important than heating. Imagine building this meditation academy on an east-facing hillside in a tropical climate. The arrangement of the buildings and their shape could remain the same, making them compatible with Vastu architecture. But the materials used the approaches for ventilation, the approaches for cool roofs would need to be locally appropriate. Here's a discussion of cooling strategies that can be used in hot, dry climates and hot, humid climates. There are basic passive approaches near the top, special passive, which means like fans, basic active, I mean, this is the fans, and then high-tech active is air conditioning. So air conditioning does not have to be the only way to cool in hot climates. And buildings can be made so they're more easily cooled, and they may still need to use some air conditioning, depending on where they are and what the season is. This is an approach that's used by architects, and it's called the bioclimatic chart. You see this gray area in the middle is the area where a person can be comfortable. It's below 30 degrees centigrade. It's above 20 degrees centigrade. And you see these lines going across the top of it. If you introduce moving air, you can extend the comfort zone. So with considerations like this, one could design Vastu buildings that were using less energy and still be very comfortable. So again, to stop contributing to global warming, buildings simply need to reduce energy use, stop operating with carbon-creating fuels, and reduce the use of processes and materials that increase carbon in the atmosphere, embodied carbon. I wanted to show this towards the end. This could be a Vastu building, and it's been designed according to tropical vernacular climatic solutions, minimum solar exposure, maximum cross ventilation, lightweight materials, open interior spaces. And here's a view from the meditation hall at sunrise to inspire us to participate in a new dawn of climate-friendly Vastu architecture. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was our final speaker, Mr. Chalnav. And I want to say thank you so much to all of our speakers, Mr. Katal Healy Singh, Mr. Javier Ortiz Cabrejos, Mr. John Lipman, and Mr. Michael Chalnav. They've really taken their time, and we've seen their effort and their expertise expressed in their presentations. So I just wanted to remind everyone, the meeting is being recorded live. It will be uploaded later on YouTube permanently for posterity, and it is currently being live streamed on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. If you have a question or a comment at this point in time, we invite you to please raise your electronic hand. You'll find that in the reactions button at the base of your screen, and only then will your mic be unmuted, and so that you can pose your questions directly to the speakers. So our first question is from Charlene. Go ahead, please, Charlene. Charlene, can you unmute?
Okay, I'm now able to unmute. Are you hearing me?
Clearly, go ahead.
Hi, Shalima. Namaste, everyone, and happy Easter. My question is related to something I just posted in the chat. If a house is in fact facing south, the front facade of the house is south, is there anything that someone who is the occupant or the resident can do to offset any of the unwanted energies and to encourage the flow of better energies within that environment? Also, the second question, and you can direct it, Shalima, please, the question. Also, when it comes to 5G and other sorts of radiation coming from cell towers, what can we do to reduce the impact or mitigate the impact of those things on the health of our lives?
Okay, thank you, Charlene. I think Mr. Lipman was responding to those questions in the chat, but
Okay.
Mr. Lipman, Yeah, please read the chat, but Mr. Lippman, would you mind summarizing? And this is essentially for the benefit of our YouTube attendees.
With pleasure. There are devices and little practices that are sometimes encountered that are claimed to mitigate the effect of a south entrance. Maharshi, from his very wise perspective, examined these and did not conclude that any of them had any significant effect. So our advice for you is examine the building, examine the house, and examine all that you can do to have an east or a north door, a door on the east or north side of the building, whether it's an existing side or rear door or whether you create one and use that. Now, I realize this is not always easy and this is not always possible, but anything less than that, we do not understand to be, too much more than a placebo. On the second question of what can be done to mitigate the effects of cell phone radiation and 5G, there is a paint. It's black, although so once you use it, you will need to paint over it, which is widely available, which you can find on EMF-oriented websites, which blocks microwave radiation. And there are also special screens, very fine mesh, which can be installed on windows, which also do a quite good job of screening out microwave radiation. So, this is kind of substantial work to do on an existing building. But for those people who have become electromagnetically sensitive, their life can be complete misery, and any solution is worth taking. And for the rest of us who have not been triggered, we are lucky, but on the cellular level, scientists have revealed that the effect of microwave radiation on human cells distorts their shape considerably. So it's good to take precautions.
All right, excellent. Thanks for those responses. There was a question in the chat, and I'm searching for it now, having to do with the placement of plants and the types of plants, whether or not that has some beneficial effect. Who would like to take that? Perhaps Michael?
Okay, I can say one or two things and maybe
Sure.
John can add to it.
Thank you.
In general, we don't want to plant any trees in front of a Vastu building that are any closer than the height of the tree, the eventual height, because that would block the sunlight, the early morning sunlight from coming. That is a plant. Another thing is that a Vastu building usually has an enclosure around it with a Vastu fence. You may have seen that on some of these pictures that we showed. And it's generally not thought to be good to have thorny plants inside that Vastu. And what else do I know? That's about it. John, did you have anything to add?
Mr. Lippman, he's asking you to add something to it.
Or Javier?
There. I was muted, and so it just took a minute. And I was, while you were talking, Michael, I was writing chat to answer another question. So hopefully I'm not duplicating what you said, but we don't have much in the way of specific recommendations for plants inside of a house. What I heard you saying was outside of a house. There are certain plants that are recommended by Shastra to be on the Brahmastan, Tulsi, holy basil, jasmine. And we also know that there are several varieties of plants easy to locate on the internet, which absorb toxins in the air. And it's almost impossible to build a house today that will have no outgassing when it is new. And so we certainly strongly encourage that one purchase those plants and have them in the house.
All right, very good.
Oh, roses are fine. Roses are the one exception to thorny plants. I see a question.
So why is a rose an exception?
I do not know the answer to this.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay. Michael, Javier.
Beauty is always better than a storm.
Please repeat.
Beauty is always better than a storm.
Beauty is always better than the thorn. Okay. We'll go with that. Thank you. So less cacti and more
Oh,
roses.
It's been said that roses are okay, and even though they have thorns, even in the garden around the house, they're okay. But other thorny bushes are not recommended by Shastra.
Okay, great. Kasrat raised a question in the chat, and that is about galvanized roofing. What would be the best types of roof? Okay, John has his hand raised. Yep, thank you very much. Please unmute.
If you can afford it, aluminum does not have any iron in it and therefore does not have the influence of shani, and we would recommend that. But of course, it's more expensive. The value, I mean, this has to do with local climates and wind speed. I know if you're asking from Trinidad, you may need spectacularly durable roofs because of hurricanes, but not knowing where you're from, fiberglass and asphalt shingle roofs, which are the most common in the United States, are fine. They're not the first thing that we recommend. The first thing we recommend actually is clay tile, glazed clay tile. That's the very best roof. Although it also is relatively expensive. Now, if you are doing rainwater catchment, you may feel that fiberglass or asphalt shingles are not good because they will introduce toxins into the water. But there was an extremely meticulous study done by the state of Washington by a large consortium of scientists collecting samples of water off of many different kinds of roofs and assaying it for about 50 different toxic chemicals. And to everyone's shock, the quality of the water that came off of fiberglass and asphalt shingle roofs was no more toxic than that which comes off of metal roofs. So there are a few points.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Mr. Ian Tijim, please go ahead, ask your question. Can you unmute?
Yeah, hi, yes. Thank you so much for all these wonderful presentations. I have been familiar with Maharshi Vastu for some time, so I do have a very detailed question, if you don't mind. I've heard from different Vastu experts that each side is divided into 8 parts, like the east side. The auspicious entrance on those 8 parts are 4 parts of that 8 parts in the east side. And on the other sides, it diminishes by 1. So even the south side has 1/8 part that's an auspicious entrance in the south side. I know in general, the south side is not healthy, but could you elaborate or give any further instruction on that question? Because it was in the Shastras that it's written that 4 parts of the 8 part in the east side is auspicious, not the other 4 parts. And on the north part is 3/4, 3 parts of the 8 parts are auspicious. Have you heard this before, or can anyone comment on this? Thank you.
Javier, can you respond to this question, please?
Yes, there is a recommendation done by Maharshi that we should prefer to use east and north, no? According with Maharshi Vastu architecture, that those are the directions that we are having as the best directions. And we are also having the results from the scientific research, no, that is showing that the brain is functioning in a more current way when we are facing east and north. So to choose another possibility, even if could be one little part, could not be the best in front of the other possibilities, the best possibilities that are being better for us.
Okay, very well. Thank you. Radha, you want to go ahead with your question, please? Can you unmute?
Yes, thank you. So thank you so much. It was very, I learned so much from all of you. Thank you. So yeah, I'm not very well dressed, but yeah, let me do that. So just wanted to tell you that here in the tropicals, we build differently. I think people loves to build with stones, and in the stones, they like to put a structure of stone, iron. So they do use a lot of iron in the structures. So I know iron is shiny, so I don't know how that is okay or not so okay. Then the question goes on to, in the tropical, is it okay to build with stones, or do we just for the sustainability to have it for a long time? Do we use stone, or do we use woods? I know woods is better, but you know, in tropical weather,
Okay.
we can have more animals and insects. That's the reason. So if you can.
Sure. Let's have a response from John, please. Thanks.
On the second question, the materials from which we build, we recommend natural materials. Stone and wood are both natural. And then the decision should be made according to the local conditions and the best practices. And you should consult with an architect or a civil engineer who is very familiar with the durability of materials in your locale. We have built extensively with both materials. It is perfectly feasible to build with stone in tropical climates, but then the walls need to be very shaded so that they do not soak up heat during the day and cook the people inside. And the other question was on what subject?
Radha, you want to repeat the other question?
Regarding iron.
Michael.
Yes, Radha had mentioned that they use stone.
Yes, the thing was that they use in the structure of the houses in the stone where they kind of make a cement, so they put kind of structures of iron, lots of irons, just to keep the structure, you know,
yes,
strong.
Well, reinforcing in concrete is very common.
Yes,
and, we don't want to cover the whole house with iron. That's a huge influence. If we have to use a little steel in the house or in a bigger building, we have to use a steel beam. We can overlook it. It's okay. But to have concrete walls with steel in them, I think there are some things that aren't so good about that. One is that if you walk near that wall with a compass, the compass won't point the right direction. So, you know, a lot of reinforcing now in concrete is done with fiberglass also. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know that, I know that concrete has been used in the Caribbean because it'll withstand any kind of storm. And when you use concrete, you have to use steel reinforcing. So it's not a deal.
May I add to that?
Please.
When we build with reinforced concrete, as Michael said, we use fiberglass reinforcement or we use basalt reinforcement. Fiberglass is more expensive than steel, But basalt, which is a natural mineral, if you can locate basalt reinforcing bar, in many cases, it is the same price as steel rebar. And so for many years, I have been able to use no iron reinforcement in my concrete at all.
Well, thank you so much. This whole Caribbean and South America can learn from this video. I thank you so much, because I think we have to start replacing that iron part. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Radha. And again, I want to say thank you so much to all of our speakers. Very, very important work that you all are doing. And we thank you so much for sharing it with us here on this program. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. And so I would like to say thank you to all our presenters once again. And thank you to you, the audience, for participating. And at this point in time, I will ask Shakira to take over. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Shalama, for being a wonderful moderator. And thank you all to our speakers and presenters. We so much appreciate your being here with us. So remember also that we are still looking for our Indian elders from the ICC, so over 80 years old, to interview live next month for part 9 of our series. And we are asking their children and grandchildren to help us in this very important oral history project. So, as we've said before, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, and you can feel free to contact the ICC to publish your books and your reports. Remember that we are asking that you give us your suggestions as well as donations, and you can contact Dr. Kumar Mahabir for further details. We want to thank the advisory and planning team led by Dr. Mahabir, our IT manager behind the scenes, Ravin Ramsingh, who has been recording the program and will edit and upload it to our website and to YouTube permanently for posterity. And our topic next Sunday will be Kamaluddin Muhammad, from Indo-Trinidadian to Caribbean man. So please feel free to visit our YouTube channel to see all our past recordings. I am Shakira Muhammad of Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyavad.
Thank you all very, very much for participating. Very educational. I'm sure all of you will agree. And scientifically based. I was impressed with all the surveys that have been done and the studies and so on, those charts. So it's not superstitious. It's not hocus pocus. It's science-based, and that's the foundation of Ayurveda, of Maharishi Institute. So maybe we can just take one or two comments, Shalima, quickly, just 2 minutes. We will run. Anybody? If not, well,
just about this superstition question, we must say that, for example, when the Shastras were speaking about the East, nobody was knowing why, no? Just maybe feeling because the sun is coming from the East. But now we know that our brain is firing these hormones when we are facing East, and when we are having a more currents functioning in our brain. So the Shastras are saying truth, but we need to get the time to prove that, no? So it's not superstition, it's knowledge that has yet to be proved.
Thank you. So, John, 1 minute, Michael, any 1 minute closing comment to the variety of questions that we have?
Before we take the closing comments, Dr. Mahabir, are we still recording?
Yes. Ravin, I sent him a message to stop recording, but okay.
Yes,
That's okay.
go ahead, please. Okay, so Michael, do you want to go ahead? Closing comments, please.
I was very inspired by Dr. Singh's overview of the whole situation, and then Javir's presentation, ending up with a huge development in Peru where the river has avoided it because it was a source of coherence. And John had a lot of very interesting points that I hadn't heard before. So for me, it was a great learning session also.
Thank you. John, last word from you.
What I have not addressed, and because I'm on another conference, I didn't get to hear the first two talks, and if they may not have addressed it. What I want to add is the personal experience, which is that as do Javier and Michael, I, of course, have been living in Vastu and Maharshi Vastu for many years. And it reaches deep into my heart. It reaches into my soul. It nourishes me. It connects me to Atma, to the divine. It enhances my life in superficial ways and in very profound ways. It brings the peace of the absolute. And it is one of the powerful technologies of the Vedic tradition. And I hope that all of you someday will have this blessing in your own lives. Because we didn't talk about personal experiences, I just wanted to tell you that, yes, there is the science, but it also is something that we feel deeply.
Good. Great. So, Shalima.
Healy Singh is here. Can we have a closing
Oh.
comment, please?
Yes. He has returned.
Yeah. Mr. Healy Singh? I wonder if
Maybe he's connected, so we will
yeah.
have to end. We will have to end.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it from us for today. Again, really fantastic presentations, and I want to say thank you so much.
Yeah, very informative, educational. Thank you.
Have a
all.
great week, everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.